What a week in the energy world.
Back to this mess that is our energy sector. It's all about, it's really come to a head this week, hasn't it?
It started like this.
Now, Genesis Energy has said it's going to have to start importing coal again because of dwindling gas supply.
It says with gas supply falling faster than projected, it's currently the only affordable option to keep the country's lights on.
Then out of the blue, this.
New Zealanders are being urged to reduce power usage tomorrow morning to avoid some parts of the country running out of electricity.
But wait, there's more.
A dramatic explosion on the sun has set off a storm in space.
The biggest solar storm in 20 years has prompted Transpower to shut down some lines around the country.
I'm Sharon Brett-Kelly. Today on The Detail, power surges, power shortages, political power games, all happening while New Zealanders head outside to catch a glimpse of a powerful night sky show.
This goes to the issue of security of supply, which is tight, and we need to restore confidence in our electricity sector so we can get the investment needed.
But let's be honest, the last government, I don't want to personalise this, they took a punt on unicorn kisses that the wind would blow and the sun would shine and the rain would always fall and we wouldn't need natural resources. Well, it's not proven to be true.
Is it really that drastic?
Operating an electricity supply system, the whole thing happens absolutely in real time. And look, you can be out of balance for literally a matter of seconds and things can come really unstuck. But I didn't mention that to scare anyone.
Electricity expert Greg Seiss will tell us more soon. But first, how a few thousand households kept their lights and heaters on full bore and fed electricity back into the grid. Solar Zero's CEO Matt Ward explains his company's response when Transpower warned of a power deficit of 20 megawatts.
That's about the size of a Huntley, basically.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, so it's significant. So Transpower got together the sector and they sort of called on everybody to do what they could, turn on extra generation. And so we made the decision to fully deploy our virtual power plant, and we decided to fully export at that time to try and avert that energy crisis.
Right. Yeah. What you've just said then, I just can't even imagine what that means. So can we? What is a virtual power plant for a start?
Okay. So we have 15,000 mums and dads across New Zealand, and each of those households have solar panels on their roof. Most of them will have 10 or 12 panels on their roof, and then all of them will have a battery. And so our model basically is that you get up in the morning and the sun will do its thing from 9 o'clock. And so during the day, you're living just on solar. And then if there's any excess that's generated during the day, particularly for those who are outside working and that sort of thing, we store that excess generation in your battery. So that when you get home, you're not relying on peak demand off the grid, you're literally using your battery. And then in the middle of the night, when you're asleep, we charge your battery up from the grid. Again, so from 1 till 4 in the morning when no one's using electricity, and you wake up in the morning and your battery is fully charged.
When you say we charge your battery from the grid, who charges it?
Yep, so we operate our 15,000 batteries as a fleet. And so we have the fleet management tools. We can see what the state of charge is for all of our customers. And we also set our battery charge profiles and discharge profiles to meet the kind of way that each of our customers live.
So on Thursday, you grouped all the power from these 15,000 households that use your system and exported it to the grid.
Correct.
How do you do that? Is it like reversing the direction of the power?
Yeah, well, so normally we set our batteries to meet the needs of our customers in the household. But sometimes we also have the ability to double down the amount that our batteries are discharging. So our customers will always use the energy first, but any excess will keep going through the switchboard, kind of run down the power lines to their neighbours effectively.
So you are helping out in a crisis, and I know that last year you kind of tested all this, didn't you, in a kind of pretend trial, and it worked.
Yeah.
Who makes money in that situation?
It's a very, very good question. So our customers will get paid for the energy they export. In our case, our customers get paid 15 cents for anything they export and 15 cents for anything that they import. That's what you sort of call net metering. So we at Sol Zero actually don't get paid for what we did last week. We did it as sort of good corporate citizens because as much as Transpower want to have those demand response and grid emergency markets in place, they don't have them. And that's one of the things that we're advocating for is the market mechanisms and the regulations to be put in place, like what you see in the UK and right across the globe. So in other markets, and the UK is a really, really good example. If you look at what happened with the energy crisis on the back of Ukraine, the UK government introduced things like demand response. So over there, if you as a consumer, you turned off your heat pump or what have you, you would actually get paid for that. Last week on Friday, we had about 260 megawatts that were turned off by consumers, both residential and industrial, but they didn't get paid for that. So the real unsung heroes of last Friday were actually all the consumers in New Zealand that did their bit and reduced their consumption.
We'll get back to Matt and how consumers will become prosumers in the future, but let's look at the basics of the electricity market. You've got the sources, the wind, the sun, water, etc. The generators capture that and turn it into electricity. Then there's the retailers who buy electricity on the wholesale market, or the gentailers if they both generate and sell the power, like Meridian. Genesis is a gentailer as well, but its place in all of this is more complicated. It owns Huntly Power Station, which uses gas and coal to provide backup power for the network when demand rises or generation from other sources drops off. Then you've got the lines companies that own the networks used to distribute electricity to the users. And there are more layers. Greg Seiss, head of Energy Link, picks it up from here.
So Transpower, of course, they're a lines company as well, but they own and operate just the national grid.
And then on top of that all, we have some sort of body that regulates the market?
Yeah, so the electricity industry regulator is the Electricity Authority, and then overseeing them is MB. So MB is the policy agency for energy at the moment. And it has been for a long time.
So Mark Dulder, my colleague at Newsroom, wrote that on Friday morning we got a glimpse of our future. Is that how you see it?
That's a very good question. And I mean, the answer to these questions are never simple. But I think there's a couple of key points here. One is that if you go back to August 2021, we did have a situation where we actually, or Transpower, had to turn off parts of the country unexpectedly. And that was a bit of a wake-up call for the industry because we hadn't had any of those for a long time. And it turned out that there were some processes that really didn't work the way that they should have. So in the sort of 2.5 years since, the industry, primarily led by Transpower, has gone through quite a process of improving those processes. So now when we get pretty close to the margin, we hear a lot more about it. And part of that's just a really healthy sign that, people are taking notice and taking action, preparing. And the result of that will be that most of the time there isn't an issue. We don't have the lights being turned out unexpectedly on people.
So the way it was handled was the right way?
Absolutely, yeah. There was lots of notice given. I get emails with invites to meetings with Transpower, and there's probably something like 100 people attending these industry forums in the lead up to these sort of events, or lack of events in this case. And that's all about getting people involved, talking through the issues, getting feedback, and et cetera, et cetera. So I think that's one key point. The other one I was going to make, though, is that as we get closer and closer to 100% renewable electricity, then the need for demand that is consumers, so large consumers, major users, the smelter, Fonterra, etc., and businesses in general, and even down to the residential level, there will be a greater need to participate in the market. Now, we may be unaware of that. It might all happen automatically, but it's getting to 100% renewables, or even that last few percent, is a huge challenge. And it's pretty much agreed globally that one of the key components to getting there is to have greater participation of demand. So demand needs to become more flexible and more responsive. So that's the other part of the answer to the question, that we will be seeing more participation from consumers turning down load at the right times, and it won't just be about generators turning their generation up in order to get through these winter peaks and dry periods, also in New Zealand as well.
So are you saying that there'll be more situations where householders have to turn off their heaters or turn off their lights or not charge their cars to get through these high peak times, or I guess to avoid power cuts?
Well, I think the key word they used there was have or have to. So ideally, there wouldn't be any obligation to do this. It would be done in a way where, for example, you might be rewarded for turning down your load, or it might be done in a way which you're not even aware of. So you probably realise that a lot of hot water cylinders are controlled, and that's been going on for decades, possibly as long as a century, actually, if you really had a close look at it. But that's the sort of thing that, it's just demand side or flexible demand, which has been sitting there for ever and ever. And yes, there might be the odd time when your shower's a little bit lukewarm, but for the most part, you're just not aware that that's happening. So what I'm talking about is participation in the electricity market, which is planned for, and which you have the option to participate in or not, as the case may be, and potentially even be rewarded for that participation.
What do you make of debate over the last few days about Labour's, well, this has come from Simeon Brown mostly, but Labour's ban on oil and gas exploration?
That's what happens when you ban oil and gas exploration, which is what the last government did, and disincentivise upstream investment in gas.
If that hadn't happened, then we wouldn't be in this situation.
Yeah, it's a little bit more complicated and subtle than that. I mean, let's deal with the ban on new offshore exploration permits that Labor brought in April 2018. Now, I remember them at the time saying, look, there's plenty of gas in reserve, and we don't need a lot of new gas exploration in order to provide enough gas for electricity generation when it's required. At the time, that was probably a fair statement, but there was a bit of an unintended side effect from that ban, in that it did tend to put out a signal to the petroleum industry that actually New Zealand wasn't a great place to come and invest. And it's all very well having reserves of gas, for example, that you can call on for electricity generation, but you have to keep drilling new wells in order to keep that gas supply running, in order to tap into those reserves. So I think what the ban did, even though obviously it had some good intentions, what the ban did was just bring us a little bit closer to the wire. And because New Zealand's not been so attractive for that investment, a lot of the potential wells that could have been drilled haven't been drilled. And then there are things that have happened which Labor could never have known about, National could never have known about. New Zealand's largest gas field, Pohokura field, is starting to run down significantly before it was expected to. So that means that the owners and operators of that field had to start drilling new wells. And if you look at the graphs of the production from the Pohokura field, they're a little bit alarming, because you can see the steady drop. And yes, they go and drill another well or two, and it brings production back up for a while, and then it starts to drop again. that obviously wasn't known about back in 2018. That didn't start until 2020, but it certainly contributed to the situation we're in at the moment, where we are a little bit short of gas this year.
Malcolm Johns is the Genesis Energy Chief Executive. Did I see that you're predicting we're going to have a shortage of gas?
Gas is certainly declining much faster than anyone anticipated. It declined 12% last year. It's declined 30% this year. And at the moment, we are burning a substantial amount more coal to cover the gas shortage that's developing in the market. Obviously, there are no new fields on the horizon, so gas is starting to become harder to come by.
Will that be solved by lifting that ban?
Well, whether lifting the ban is really necessary or not is probably a bit of a side issue. But what needs to happen is that the petroleum industry, or particularly the gas producers and potential gas producers that might come to New Zealand to invest in producing new gas, they need to have the confidence, and in other words, the government policy settings need to be such that it will give the gas producers confidence to invest, to keep drilling. Most of that drilling will be in existing fields that are already producing. The other thing that a lot of people don't appreciate is that even before the ban in 2018, the last new discovery of a gas field in New Zealand was back in 2005, and that's despite a lot of drilling going on until around about 2014, when it tapered off quite significantly. So even with all that exploration, there wasn't new gas being found. So we're really quite reliant now on the existing fields, and we need to keep drilling into those fields to keep the gas flowing for as long as we can from them. And maybe along with that, there needs to be some exploration for new gas fields as well, if that gas is required to get us through the next decade or two.
So, from what you're saying, we're going to rely on fossil fuels for quite some time in terms of knowing that we have a reliable energy supply or electricity supply.
Absolutely. There's no doubt about that whatsoever. The only alternative is to turn off our heating and, potentially go back to what I remember from the 1970s, sitting in candlelight. And, we used to use our gas cooker during some of the shortages, 73, 74 potentially. So assuming that we don't want to go back to those days, we have to keep the gas and potentially coal as well coming for the next decade and a half, 2 decades. It's really difficult to know how long it will take to have viable solutions. But in the meantime, we need fossil fuel thermal generation.
So that means that we won't be 100% renewable by 2030, by that goal?
No, and we were never going to be. I mean, that was completely unrealistic. And this is another sort of key point. Do we need 100% renewable electricity anytime soon? If you go back to the Interim Climate Change Committee, which was the precursor to the Climate Change Commission, in 2019, they said, look, we don't need 100% renewable electricity. Getting the last 5% of fossil fuel generation replaced by renewables is just really difficult, really expensive. No one really knows how to do it. But what we should be concentrating on is, get to 90-95% renewable electricity, but the real gains, the real wins are in other sectors. So particularly transport. So we're talking EVs here, electrifying transport and also electrifying industry. And you can still make huge reductions in emissions without being at or even close to 100% renewable electricity.
A lot of the discussion in the last few days has been about market mechanisms and regulations, that we need more market mechanisms that respond to the new technology that's in place right now, such as the solar power and the batteries.
Yes, so that's becoming quite a pressing need to have better protocols in place to share information, market mechanisms. And the sorts of things we're talking about here are, for example, if the transport fleet is converted completely to electric vehicles, you're talking 4.5 million vehicles, I think, including heavy transport. The battery capacity that you're talking about there is colossal. Now, if we need battery storage, they're going to be an obvious source of that to get us through the sort of events that we've had just in the last week or so. But at the moment, there's no way of coordinating the use of that colossal battery capacity and energy storage, which is going to be there in future years, into the electricity market so that it's available at the right time. So, that's a really obvious one that needs to be worked on. And exactly how that would work, I don't think anyone can really say at this stage, but the Electricity Authority has some work streams running already which are going to be looking at these sort of issues. They sort of go under the heading of demand-side flexibility, or DSF is the acronym. So potentially DSF markets and other mechanisms for coordinating demand response and demand participation with the rest of the electricity market.
So, Greg, do you feel enough is being done, that there's the response is swift enough and substantial enough for us to feel confident in our electricity system?
Well, I think so. But having said that, that still means that we're reliant on that fossil fuel thermal generation being around. In terms of developing mechanisms and protocols, etc., for demand-side flexibility, then we really need to ramp the work on that area up, because things like electric vehicles and industrial electrification are coming at us at an increasingly rapid rate. And we don't want to be in a situation where we're behind the rate of uptake of electric vehicles and other electrification. So yeah, that's an area where we really need to increase the rate of progress.
We've had a very centralised way of thinking about electricity. We've generated whatever it is, 70-80% of it in the South Island, and we've put it over the HVDC to all the towns and
HVDC,
the high voltage cable that goes across the Cook Strait.
The big, huge.
Yep, that's right. And so the consumers have always been quite passive. They just turn on a light switch and they don't really know what happens, and they're not engaged. They get a power bill and that's about it. But the energy transition is about involving our consumers in the energy transition. Overseas and here in New Zealand, with businesses like ourselves, customers are generating electricity on their roof, and they can be incentivised and rewarded to change their behaviour. So you're going to move away from, consumers of electricity to almost prosumers. What I hope comes out of last week is an appreciation that yes, we need to build more generation, and that takes time, but B, we need the markets and the regulations in place, like you see in the UK and other markets, that rewards people for reducing their consumption. We don't need to build our way out of this. We're not building motorways. We just need to be smart and send the right incentives.
As for the solar storm, well, nothing to do with the electricity market, says Greg. Speaking of which, there is some good news. An out-of-action gas-fired turbine in the North Island will be back up and running in July, and a new geothermal power station has just started commissioning trials. That's it for today. The detail is supported by RNZ and NZ On Air. Alexia Russell and Davina Zimmer produced this podcast. Jeremy Ansell engineered it. Thanks to Matt Ward and Greg Seiss. I'm Sharon Brett Kelly. Ka kite.